thank you so much for being here. It's nice to see you in person. I want to start with the Mideast and President Biden announcing on Wednesday that he would block some shipments of U.S. weapons if Israel invades Rafah. Sure. He's frustrated after months of telling the Israeli prime minister to be more targeted. He doesn't think that Netanyahu is changing course. And the president believes that too many civilians have been killed with U.S. weapons. Is that a fair concern?
Well, first of all, Dana, let me say Happy Mother's Day
to
you and all the moms watching. But to answer your question, I think there are two big problems with what the Biden administration is doing. First of all, it's a fundamentally incoherent policy. On the one hand, they're saying too many Palestinian civilians have been killed. With the other hand, they're depriving the Israelis of the precision-guided weapons that actually cut down on civilian casualties. So if you're worried about Palestinian casualties, the stated policy here actually doesn't make a ton of sense. And I think the bigger problem here, if we zoom out, is, look, and I hate to say this, but America is not good at micromanaging wars in the Middle East. Joe Biden has been president for 4 years, but he's really presided over, as a senator and a vice president, many of the biggest disasters we've had in foreign policy in the Middle East over the last 40 years. And I think that our attitude vis-a-vis the Israelis should be, look, we're not good at micromanaging Middle Eastern wars. The Israelis are our allies. Let them prosecute this war the way they see fit.
The argument that President Biden has made, we understand in private, and he's done it in public, is that he is trying to get the Israeli prime minister to learn the lessons of wars in the U.S. By the way, it was a Republican who was president, George W. Bush. The way that the U.S. responded in Afghanistan and, of course, the war in Iraq, to learn the lessons. And he doesn't believe that the prime minister is doing so.
Yeah, so first of all, I completely concede, by the way, it was a Republican president in Iraq, though with Democratic buy-in from people like Joe Biden.
Sure.
But I think to learn the lessons...
And it's not just Iraq, it's Afghanistan.
Of multiple conflicts. Look, we've not been good at this, and that's been a bipartisan failure. By the way, it's one of the reasons why I think Donald Trump was a good foreign policy president. He departed from that wisdom. But to answer your question, Dana, I mean, look, the fundamental problem here is the Israelis have a goal in mind. Hamas started a war by murdering a large number of Israeli civilians, and now that they're 80% defeated, they're throwing up their hands and saying, "Uncle." Now, yeah, Palestinian civilian casualties is a real issue, and our heart certainly goes out to them. We have to ask ourselves, why are Palestinian civilian casualties so high? It's because Hamas started the war, and now they hide behind Palestinian civilians. So if you want to learn the lessons, I think, of the last 40 years, the most important thing is we have to defeat Hamas as a viable military organization. You're never going to defeat the ideology of Hamas, but you can root out those commanders, those final military trained battalions, and I think we should empower the Israelis to do it. The final point here, Dana, I think is very important. Our goal in the Middle East should be to allow the Israelis to get to some good place with the Saudi Arabians and other Gulf Arab states. There is no way that we can do that unless the Israelis finish the job with Hamas. If they can't even do that, the attitude in the Middle East will be, you can't trust these guys. They're not pursuing their own national security. So we've got to let them finish this job. And I think hopefully on the other end of it, get to a new era in the Middle East.
I want to ask about something that Donald Trump said
Sure.
On social media. He said, what Biden is doing with respect to Israel is disgraceful. If any Jewish person voted for Joe Biden, they should be ashamed of themselves. He's totally abandoned Israel. You tweeted that Donald Trump was right about that. So I just want to be clear. You think that Jewish people who voted for Joe Biden should be ashamed of themselves?
Well, what I think, Dana, is that people should look at the record here and recognize that Donald Trump has actually been really good for the state of Israel. We had peace and prosperity in our country, and we had a very stalwart ally of the Israelis. Now, Joe Biden is president. The Israelis have been attacked. You've got these terrible campus protests with a lot of anti-Semitic overtones all over our country. And you also have him trying to micromanage the Israeli response to them being attacked. Do I think it's reasonable to look at this situation and say that if you're a Jewish American who cares about the state of Israel, who cares about these anti-Semitic riots, and say you should be on the side of Republicans in 2024 because they governed effectively on some of the issues that you care about? I think it's a totally reasonable argument to make, and I think that Donald Trump's going to keep on making it.
You know, historically, the notion of saying to Jews, you should put Israel first and what happens in Israel first and not sort of consider them American citizens first has been used as an anti-Semitic trope. Do you recognize that there? And perhaps that language isn't exactly on point when you're talking about something that is very, very, it's like a tinderbox right now.
We have to remember Donald Trump is very direct here.
But you said he was right.
And he hasn't singled out Jewish Americans. He singled out a lot of people for voting for Joe Biden and suggesting they've got to wake up and elect him as president in 2024. So I don't think there's any effort to single out Jewish Americans. And just on that particular question about tropes, I mean, look, we know that Jewish Americans and non-Jewish Americans care about our ally Israel. We know that Jewish Americans and non-Jewish Americans care a lot about these ridiculous protests. I actually have a friend of mine whose brother was graduating from Columbia who had the graduation ceremony canceled. And that's a non-Jewish person who cares a lot about these anti-Semitic protests. So I think the fact that Donald Trump is talking about Jews in that particular context does not mean he doesn't think the same lessons apply to a whole host of American citizens.
Yeah, because he did say that any Jewish person who voted for Joe Biden should be ashamed of themselves. I want to move on.
But he's made similar comments about a lot of different groups of people, Dana. I don't think anybody could look at the presidency and the conduct of Donald Trump and say, this is a person who's somehow anti-Semitic. And I think whether you're Jewish or not, you should be looking at the record of Joe Biden.
He had dinner with Nick Fuentes, who is an avowed anti-Semite.
Dana, you should look at the record of Joe Biden and recognize that whether you're Jewish or not, his presidency has been a disaster for the American people.
I want to ask about what we saw this past week, and it's going to continue this week, the trial in New York. Adult film actress Stormy Daniels testified about her allegation of a sexual encounter with Donald Trump. Now, after the Access Hollywood tape in 2016, you tweeted, quote, "Fellow Christians, everyone is watching us when we apologize for this man. Lord help us." Now, you've since deleted that tweet. Do you still feel that way about Donald Trump's sexual indiscretions?
Well, first of all, Donald Trump is not on trial for sexual indiscretions. This is a sham trial where they're saying his misdeed is that he violated the law, that he committed a crime. You can't throw somebody in prison in the middle of a presidential election because you think that he did something bad 10 years ago. So I think we have to separate these arguments from the actual criminal trial that's attempting to, in my view, Dana, interfere in a presidential election. But look, my view on Donald Trump, I've been very clear on this, is, look, I was wrong about him. I didn't think he was going to be a good president, Dana, and I was very, very proud to be proven wrong. It's one of the reasons why I'm working so hard to get him elected. And I think the contrast here is really from Joe Biden, who delivered chaos on the world stage, rising cost of living here at home, to Donald Trump, who delivered peace and prosperity to the American people and to the world. That's a very, very simple contrast to make. And I think Republicans just have to hammer that message home because we've got the winning horse here and we've got the winning message.
And I just want to be clear, the notion of what you're right, that he's not on trial for alleged sexual indiscretions. It's something else. But do you think that he should be treated differently because he was a former president, because he is running for president? And if he's convicted, do you still support him?
Well, I don't think he should be treated differently at all, Dana, but I certainly think he is being treated differently. The only thing that Alvin Bragg, the New York prosecutors team, thinks Donald Trump did wrong is that he ran for president in 2024 and he looks to be on the cusp of victory. That is the only thing that this is ultimately about. If you look at the underlying argument of the case, they can't even identify what it is that Donald Trump did. They said he committed a paperwork violation in the service of a crime, but they won't even specify the crime that he allegedly committed. And I think that when you look at all of these attacks on Donald Trump, you have to be honest with yourself and say, this is not about law and this is not about justice. This is about the fact that President Joe Biden has a failed record as commander-in-chief and leader of this country, and the Democrats can't talk about that. So what they're doing is putting these trials out there and saying, focus on this, not on the fact that the world is on fire and the fact that you have gotten poorer under the presidency of Joe Biden.
Yeah, a lot of things to unpack there. We're almost out of time. I just want to look forward. 2024, this election year that we're in, will you commit to accepting the results of this year's election?
Look, Dana, I totally plan to accept the results of 2024. I think that Donald Trump will be the victory. And if it's a free and fair election, Dana, I think every Republican will enthusiastically accept the results. And again, I think those results will show that Donald Trump has been elected president, been reelected president. I think that this question, though, it's interesting, Dana, because We have to be willing, as Democrats did in 2000, as Democrats have done in the past, and certainly as Republicans did in 2020, is if you think there were problems, you have to be willing to pursue those problems and try to prosecute your case. And certainly, if we have a free and fair election, I'll accept the results.
Even if Joe Biden wins?
Sure. If it's a free and fair election, I will accept the results, Dana, whoever wins.
Okay. Senator, thank you so much.
Thanks, Dana.
Appreciate you coming in.